Hello, welcome to the Greenview Talk podcast. Today, we will talk about the article, The Climate Mitigation Trap, when even the WWF and Bill Gates confirm the conservative alert about geopolitics as an economic vector at the climate conference, written by me, Antonio Fernando Pinheiro Pedro, and by great friends, Rafael Possik and Helder Telles Stapait. The Conference of the Parties on Climate Change COP30, hosted in Belém do Pará, would be a milestone for Brazil in the international environmental arena if, behind the promises of green leadership, there wasn't a complex web of geopolitical interests that demand deep analysis, especially by those who advocate for an environmental agenda based on sovereignty, prudence, and the reality of developing countries. In February 2025, I published the article A Conservative Look at COP30 and Brazil on the Eagle View blog, in which I warned about the strategic mistake of prioritizing mitigation actions over adaptation and resilience. This is because this choice is not neutral. It expresses a globalist progressive desire to impose limits on the development of global South countries, a typical jargon of the globalist trend, transferring to them an environmental liability from the global North and turning their economies into laboratories for costly and risky energy alternatives, something like replacing the collaborative effort of adaptation and resilience with climate indulgences. Now, on the eve of COP30, I read an interview granted by Tatiana Oliveira, leader of international strategy at WWF Brazil, to Correio Brasiliense Squared, a confirmation, albeit through another route, of the same warnings I have been making for a long time. That is, the unlikely convergence came from the realization that, in the climate debate, there is no longer room for naivety. Tatiana was clear in stating that 60% of global climate financing is allocated to mitigation, while only 30% goes to adaptation and loss and damage. This means that the countries most vulnerable to climate change, precisely those that have historically contributed the least to the problem, receive fewer resources to protect themselves and face more pressure to reduce emissions. This logic reveals a structural imbalance. While developed countries maintain their energy matrices and consumption patterns, developing nations are constrained to preserve forests, limit land use, and adopt green technologies that are still uncertain. Another point of convergence between my analysis and the WWF interview is the criticism of the financing model. Tatiana denounces that most of the resources arrive in the form of loans, with high interest rates and exchange rate risk, which ends up further indebting the countries of the global South. In her words, many end up paying more in interest than they initially received. This finding reinforces the argument that climate financing, as structured today, is not a mechanism of international solidarity, but rather a tool for geopolitical and financial control. In truth, there is a transfer of climate indulgences onto the shoulders of those who should receive financial support, and in the end are indebted and limited by the penalties transferred to them. The interview also addresses Brazil's role as a testing ground for environmental and energy solutions. The Tropical Forests Forever Fund, TFFF, for example, although having merits, still carries the risk of subordinating the management of Brazilian natural resources to external interests, especially when it involves market instruments such as debentures and green bonds. Furthermore, the international pressure against oil exploration at the mouth of the Amazon River is another example of how Brazil is charged for decisions that developed countries do not apply to themselves. This trap has already been experienced in South America with REDD+, and was the subject of another article of mine about what happened in Ecuador. In a stunning reversal in the activist world, Bill Gates, one of the main advocates for reducing carbon emissions, published a notable dissertation on the eve of COP30, in which he argues that resources should be diverted from the battle against climate change to support the fight against hunger and misery, i.e., human resilience. Gates argues that instead of supporting mitigation measures and carbon credits, the world's philanthropists should increase their investment in other efforts aimed at preventing disease and hunger. I confess that the argument sounded like a true QED, quod erit demonstrandum. That is, the billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates seems to adhere now, through other means, to my historical conservative thesis. According to CNN4, reporting on the eve of COP30, Gates declared that the climate crisis will not wipe out humanity, further adding that past investments in fighting climate change were mislocated and a lot of good money went into expensive and questionable efforts. This is an opportunity to refocus on the metric that should matter even more than emissions and temperature changes, improving lives. Our main goal should be to prevent suffering, especially for those living in the toughest conditions in the world's poorest countries, concluded the Microsoft founder. This reveals that not only the globalist militancy recognizes what we have been pondering for years, but those who finance it also wake up to the issue, which is symptomatic. It is revealing that a leader from the WWF, an organization historically aligned with progressive agendas, and one of its main supporters, Bill Gates, recognize the same problems that I have been denouncing from a conservative perspective. This shows that regardless of the ideological bias, there is a legitimate concern for climate justice, national sovereignty, and the effectiveness of environmental policies. This convergence should be seen as an opportunity. The environmental debate needs to be plural, technical, and free of dogmas. Brazil has much to contribute, but it cannot do so by giving up its autonomy and its socio-economic reality. COP30 will be an important and dangerous stage. It is up to Brazil to reaffirm its environmental leadership based on its own vision of development, valuing local knowledge, private property, rural production, and national technology. The WWF interview and Bill Gates' analysis confirm it. The conservative warning is not an exaggeration. It's the diagnosis. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to share this video with your friends and your opinion through the comments. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell, as this helps us reach more and more people looking for quality information and learning. See you soon in our next video.